listening to Give God 90, where we're not afraid of the tough biblical questions, because we will dig through the language, the culture, and the history to find the truth revealed in the words of our Creator.
Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for letting us spend some time with you. We certainly do appreciate it.
We absolutely do.
I am being very carefully monitored and supervised.
As always. Thank you for joining us.
If you haven't been to GiveGod90.com lately, you might want to check that out. Author Jerry Mitchell's where you buy the books. I think that's all the advertisements tonight, other than be sure you hit the share buttons, like buttons, pass this along, because do all the things. Hopefully, I can give you some information tonight that you might find interesting. I hope. I always hope it's interesting, but some things are more timely than others, I guess. There's been a lot of talk lately, and I said this was going to happen a couple of months ago, where you're going to hear more and more about food and more about what's in it. And, you know, I'm not going to get into should we eat pork or shellfish. That's already been established by the Creator, although there is a reminder in a few minutes. It's in my notes. No worry, I didn't forget it. But I want to make sure that you get accurate information. You know, you need to think about this, and hopefully, this will provoke some very serious thought on your part. Most regular listeners know that I have a very long background in production agriculture. I grew up on a small grain vegetable farm. We had laying hens before I was old enough to remember. They had, cattle. They had horses and mules and pigs, and it was a farm. They had all the things, right? But when I was growing up, it was mostly chickens for animals. Couple years, my one next older brother and I were actually involved in the broiler growing competition program. So, I'm not new to agriculture. I'd spent the majority of my career in natural reproduction of large animals. Now, it didn't just stop with our immediate family. My father's uncle actually managed a very large hatchery, chicken hatchery, where they would actually incubate about 50,000 eggs at any given time. That's a lot of eggs. That's a lot of eggs. Now, not all of these eggs hatched at the same time. They were in stages, right? And they would hatch somewhere between 2,000 to 4,000 eggs every couple of days. And I remember when I was young, 7, 8 years old maybe, we would go there every so often, and because that's where my uncle worked and my two aunts worked there at the time, I would watch the processing, right? They would take these chicks, about a day old at the time, debeak them, right, where they used the hot something, and they would take the beaks off so they didn't peck at each other. They would vaccinate them, right? I don't remember what was in the vaccination because, well, I was really, really young. Right? That's been a long time ago, folks. But chicks today get similar treatment, right? They're hatched, they get debeaked, they get vaccinated, right? And when they're finished, they get put in some very special cardboard boxes. They got holes all over them. Not big enough so that they can get out, of course, but, then they're taken to the growing houses. Your grandmother also vaccinated chickens in a hatchery, right?
Yes.
Okay. So it was a huge, huge operation at the time. Now, what a lot of you may not realize is it was in the mid-Atlantic where the broiler industry really got started. The farm I grew up on was, well, at that time, about a 20-minute drive to where Mrs. Wilmer Steele is credited with beginning the whole thing back in 1923. She raised a flock of 5,000 birds to sell for meat. And it was so profitable for her that in a couple of years, she was able to build a growing house that was suited for 10,000 birds. Now, at the time, that was an outrageous number of chickens because back then, all the processing was done, all the slaughter and processing was done by hand. If you visit the Delaware Agriculture Museum in Dover, I think they probably still have an exhibit that tells that whole story there, how everything got started. Now, I'm beginning with the chicken industry when we talk about food because there's so much misinformation being passed along about avian influenza, bird flu, right? It's getting to be a big deal, and it's kind of, there's just a huge amount of misinformation out there. But before we get going down that road, let's get some basics about what the Bible has to tell us where our food should come from, if you would like to read those passages.
God said, "Look, I have given you all the plants that have grains for seeds, and I have given you all the trees whose fruits have seeds in them. They will be food for you. I have given all the green plants to the animals to eat. They will be food for every wild animal, every bird of the air, and every small crawling animal." And it happened. Genesis chapter 1, verse 29 and 30. You make the grass for cattle and vegetables for the use of man, and make food grow from the earth. Psalms 104, verse 14. Everything that moves, everything that is alive, is yours for food. Earlier I gave you the green plants, and now I give you everything for food. But you must not eat meat that still has blood in it, because blood gives life. Genesis chapter 9, verses 3 and 4.
Okay. Now, I need to remind you that in the style of Hebraic writing, the basic story is given, and then later on there's some clarification that's given as well. And it's similar to the way we're taught today, right? We learn how to count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then we learn how to add and subtract. We learn what you can do with the numbers. Same with letters. You learn your alphabet, and then you learn how to spell. Small words at first. Usually that's the best way it works. Anyway, when Moses writes that all of the plants were given for food and water, later we learn that because of sin, that changes. In Genesis 3, 17 and 18, to Adam he said, "Because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten from the tree that I commanded you not to eat, cursed is the ground because of you, though through toil you will eat from it all the days of your life. Both thorns and thistles it will yield for you, and you will eat plants of the field." So prior to this, all plants were edible. There was no poison ivy, apparently. There were no plants that would try to stick you, sting you, or otherwise try to kill you. So that was the plant faction of it, right? Sin brought the cursed earth. It brought the thorns and the thistles and the plants that were harmful for us. Leviticus 11, we learn what clean meat is, right? The meat that will be used for our food. And this really is just a reminder. You can't take one verse out of the Bible and build sound doctrine. You have to use the whole thing. We don't get to pick and choose what part of the Bible we think we want to follow. It's not a smorgasbord. So for plants, we eat what is grown specifically for our consumption. It doesn't mean that we can only eat what we grow, but it indicates that we need to be careful when we're harvesting plants to eat, so that we eat the things that are healthy for us, the things that are good for us, right? You want to leave the stuff alone that's bad for you. You don't want to eat the hemlock. You don't want to eat the poison ivy. That's bad for you. It will hurt you. When it comes to caring for livestock, the original design for everything was, we would consider it today more free range, right? Doesn't mean that shepherds would just let their flocks run wild. It meant that the animals were not confined for the purpose of fattening them for slaughter, right? There is a very interesting verse in Psalms, if you want to read that. What did I do with it?
Every animal of the forest is already mine. The cattle on 1,000 hills are mine. I know every bird on the mountains. Every living thing in the field is mine. Psalms chapter 50, verses 10 and 11.
What we see here, the word translated cattle, actually means every large animal with four legs. It includes livestock, but it also includes some other things. And birds, well, they're birds. It's that simple. Animals were designed to be out on pasture, not confined for feed. If you remember, Moses was tending his flocks on Mount Sinai when the Almighty came to him in a burning bush and said, I got a job for you, right? Our Creator designed this system so that animals would be out eating what animals eat, not confined. What happened in the last 100 years or so? We don't allow most of the meat that we eat to be grown the way the Creator designed it. We just don't. Today we have growing houses for chicken and turkeys. We have stockyards for cattle and sheep. But what has that done for the health of the animal? Well, let's get back to the chicken industry, since we're, listening on the news so often to, it's avian flu. Well, about 50 years ago, the size of a growing house was actually determined by how many birds would comfortably fit in it. As time progressed, some of the scientists who specialized in this kind of thing said, you know what? We can put more birds in the same size house. In other words, they were putting more animals in the same amount of space. And believe it or not, the time to grow the chicks to full-size birds back then was between 12, 16, sometimes 18 weeks on average. But it kind of depended on whether they were going to be processed for broilers, large birds that you would, cook the whole bird in a pot, or would they be fryers? Would they be cut up for, breasts and legs and thighs and wings and that kind of thing? Now, while the scientists were increasing the number of birds in the houses, they were also developing feed through the use of growth hormones and steroids. And that actually reduced the time to grow a bird to get it the right size, right? And the industry was absolutely ecstatic when the average time was reduced to between 10 and 12 weeks. Now they're sending birds to the processing plant in sometimes 8 and 9 weeks. Now the result of this was pretty well known. A lot of young girls who consumed a lot of chicken in their diet were actually reaching puberty at an early age. And there were some other not very nice side effects as well. Okay? But that's the human aspect. What about the birds? Well, what most people don't like to hear, what they don't know, what's really being kept quiet in a way, the birds in the early industry were healthy. There was not a lot of disease, even though we knew about avian influenza, we knew about bird flu. It wasn't a huge concern because the birds themselves remained healthy. It wasn't until the late 70s, early 80s that overcrowding became an issue. And then they realized that overcrowding had some negative effects on the immune system of the birds in confined feeding operations. It also has some negative effects on cattle and sheep as well. But the scientific answer was not to reduce the number of birds or to increase the number of people growing the birds so they had more houses, even though they were in the area we were in. They were building more chicken houses at the time than they were houses for people to live in. The answer wasn't to reduce the number of birds to ease the overcrowding. The answer was to medicate them. They, instead of making the birds healthier through natural means, we'll just give them more medicine. We'll just inject them with more vaccines. We'll just put more stuff in their feed to help keep them healthy. And then something else happened, not just to the chicken industry, but to the livestock industry overall. And that is the release of genetically modified grains that was approved for animal feed. Now, the idea of genetically modified grain was, we can use more herbicides in the field where they're grown. And yes, mostly specific was what's known as Roundup. Very good herbicide when used properly, but originally it was not to be used in the production of grain or vegetables or anything else, right? It was specific for fence rows and for driveways, that kind of thing. It wasn't to be used originally where food would be grown. The introduction of genetically modified organism grain in animal feed, it unleashed a multitude of problems. There was just a lot of it. It has affected everything from the animals that eat the grain, to the people that eat the grain, to the people that eat the animals, to the pollinators that pollinate the flowers from like soybeans. There's a lot of problems that they just didn't understand. The answer, though, for some strange reason, they haven't learned. Because the answer for all this is, well, we'll just go back to the way we're doing things. That would be easy. And quite honestly, it wouldn't be profitable. So instead, what do? We come up with more medication. Much more medication. For the animals, for the people. You get the idea now? And really, the secular world has a far more difficult time rationalizing the use of vaccines than young Earth creation people do. You see, young Earth creation, with a view based that the Earth is only about 6,000 years old, has to realize that these viruses and diseases have only really been affecting us for about 4,000 years since Noah. So we have a much shorter time frame to consider when we look at the effects of disease. But an evolutionary scientist has millions of years to work with. And when you put it in that viewpoint, when you think of it this way, why hasn't these viruses like bird flu killed off all the birds already? Why didn't swine flu kill all the pigs a million years ago? When you look at it that way, why in the world did mankind survive any kind of flu at all? Right? The answer to these questions is not found in the secular world. The answer is actually found in the sacred word of the Creator. Up until about 100 years ago or so, our food was our medicine. The food we ate, being grown the way it was supposed to be grown, kept us healthy. Hopefully, now that you've heard that, you're thinking, well, what can we get? What can we do? How do we get back to having healthy food? Well, you're not going to want to hear this because unless you are willing to grow some of your own food, or you're willing to be more careful about what you buy and where you buy it, there's not much you're going to do at all. You see, we can't rely on our government, not in the United States or anywhere else. We can't rely on the government to keep us healthy because they're the ones who gave the approval to use confined animal feeding techniques. They're the ones who said, oh yeah, genetically modified grain, that's fine to use for animal food. A couple years later, they said, oh yeah, genetically modified, we can put that in people food too. Did you realize that? It's regulated. It had to come from somewhere. My best advice that I can give you is to look around for some healthy choices. In the United States, more and more farmers markets are found every summer. There are Amish markets around the country. There are small farms willing to sell their wares. But you need to be the one to seek them out. That's right, it's up to you. You need to be the one that takes part in the Creator's economy. You actually need to go talk to people. You can't rely on an app on your phone to do your shopping for you. Okay? You can't rely on an app on your phone to do your grocery shopping for you. There's actually a passage in Daniel chapter 11 and 12. Daniel's told about some things in the future. And some of these things he says, I can't understand it. Now he's told, some of these things you can pass along, some of these things you have to keep to yourself, right? And I have to wonder if some of the things that Daniel couldn't understand are happening in our world today. You see, in Daniel's time, all he needed to worry about was food sacrificed to idols, right? Today, we don't need to worry as much about food being sacrificed to idols, but how our food is manipulated to make us sick instead of keeping us healthy. Isaiah warned us, there's going to be a time when what is good will be called bad, what is bad will be called good. The world, as you know it, is turning upside down. And I know it can seem overwhelming. I know it can. But if you choose to live the way your Creator designed you to live, you can't be lazy about it. You have to participate. You have to participate in your own health. You have to participate in making your own wise decisions, informed decisions. You need to educate yourself so that you can make wise choices. Just because your favorite TV news anchor says something doesn't make it true. It just doesn't make it true. Look at what is happening around you and ask yourself, is this how the Creator designed it originally, Or is this how mankind has corrupted it for our own destruction? The reality is you're going to pay for good health one way or the other. You can either eat good food, healthy food, and it might cost a little more, but it keeps you healthy. Or you can eat the junk that you find on most store shelves that makes you sick. And then, if you do that, you get to take the secular scientist medications. That's your choice. You can either pay for it up front and be healthy, or you can eat what you want, get sick, and pay for it through prescription drugs. Choice is yours. The choice is yours. I hope you choose wisely. There. I got through it. Wasn't sure I was going to, because there were some other things I wanted to say that I just didn't. But from somebody who's been involved in production agriculture for a very, very long time, this is where we're at. Figure it out, make wise choices. And until next time.
Until next time.
We wish you many, many blessings, everyone.
Be blessed all.